Hello, I'm Jeffrey Smith, and I'm the author of HowTherapyWorks.com and also the Substack called the Psychotherapy Lab. And I want to talk today about accurate empathy. This is a term that I think is capable of transforming a practice of therapy, or at least improving anybody's practice of therapy, because it really is kind of the universal element that is behind the success of any really good psychotherapy. So let's get started. When I was a resident, I used to I used to wonder, and after when I got out into practice, I'd wonder, well, what is my main objective? What am I trying to do here? And it's not just being helpful isn't really good enough. It's something else. And the first answer I came up with was well, I'm really trying to understand. Trying to understand in depth. And now, many decades later, I think we can go just a step better than that understanding. And that is what accurate empathy is about. Um, but let's first talk a little bit about empathy itself. Empathy is something that you feel, but it's not just being a nice person or being solicitous or being or having good intentions. What really makes empathy happen is that the other person lets you in on their inner life. And then just automatically, because we're human beings, we experience empathy. We put ourselves automatically in their shoes. So the trick then for making empathy happen is helping the client to let us into their world. And that is really the essence of what I'm going to be talking about. So forget what you might have thought about empathy, that it's something that you're supposed to cultivate in yourself, and think rather that it's cultivating the skill of helping other people to share to know their deep self and to share that with you. A definition of accurate empathy, well, it's a term that comes from Carl Rogers, and his definition was pretty much the same as mine. It's an in-depth understanding of the other person from their point of view. In other words, being able to put yourself in their shoes. I think of it as an emotionally engaged, constantly deepening understanding of the other person. The constantly deepening is really important, and I think the best way to think about it is how do you how do you get in conversation with a child? Let's say you're driving them to school, and day after day, you just express an interest in whatever they want to talk about, whatever's going on. Maybe you ask a question here and there, but it's really the comfort level of the repetitive action, the repetitive being together, and little by little, your child begins to reveal more things about themselves, and they think out loud, and you become part of that dialogue. That's how you gain empathy into a child's world, and it's the same thing with clients. Is that or anybody else that you have a deepening relationship with, and the deeper you go, the more you find out, and the more surprises you come upon. So in therapy, it's the same thing. We're cultivating an atmosphere of safety. And as we do that, and as we demonstrate our genuine interest, not just in generalities about this person, but in their uniqueness, then that encourages both the conscious adult person to talk with us, but it also sends messages to the inner self that we're really interested in, we really want to hear, and that awakens the inner self and encourages it to share contents with us. Now, are those contents words? they don't start out that way because the things that are stored in the subconscious inner mind are not stored as words, they're stored as metaphors. They're stored as images and feelings and actions and experiences and pictures and even intentions and long-term quests and all kinds of things, but they're not in words. And so they're going to come out to us as expressed in emotions, in thoughts. The thoughts are metaphors, in images, in tone of voice, in facial expressions, in involuntary things like tears. All of those are ways that the subcortical, subconscious inner mind speaks to us and lets us in. So those are all part of what we are learning, and we're taking in that information using our own inner mind to appreciate what it is that we're learning. And as we do that, we'll automatically feel experience the other person's world as best as one person can do that, which is not perfect. It can never be perfect, but it's closer than anything else. And so part of what I'm doing then in talking about accurate empathy is I'm really talking about appreciating the inner mind that for the most part holds our strongest motivations, holds our most important passions, uh, understands what our life is supposed to be about, what we're doing, whether that might be something that's in sync with our conscious life or out of sync because it maybe got frozen in time at some point previously and is being held in that frozen state where we still need to make contact with that and get to know it. So I think you have some hints about where I'm going with this. Um, Let me stop for just a moment and and uh, give you a glimpse of the framework that I'm working with because it doesn't belong to any traditional therapy, but it's compatible with all of them, and it's based on a 21st century scientific understanding of how the mind processes information, and as designed for the survival of the species. So, how do people get into trouble? How do they develop maladaptive patterns that bring people to psychotherapy? Well, where those come from is this same subcortical, subconscious inner mind is designed to predict and detect potential threats, and when it does that, it puts out a signal that we better do something about it. And that signal turns out to be an emotional signal. It's not conscious emotions necessarily. It's more of a proto emotion, something that neurologists think of as a neurological activation that signals the need for a response. But we as therapists can think of it as a proto emotion that moves us with a sense of dread that we need to save ourselves from some potential dreaded circumstance or event or happening. And that's where the problems that we see as therapists pretty much entirely turn out to be solutions to dreaded threats that as perceived by the inner mind. That's what psychotherapy is aimed at treating. Psychotherapy is designed to treat. It does some other things um, like influencing epigenetics and changing the vasovagal tone and things like that. But those are secondary. Those aren't the main objective. The main thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to help people with maladaptive patterns. Now, there's something else about maladaptive patterns that's going to turn out to be extremely important. And that is why I call them entrenched maladaptive patterns. Entrenchment means that the inner mind that's seeking the survival of the species, it's designed for the survival of the species, is considering a a a is processing threats and coming up with responses to those threats, responses that are shaped by evolution and by past experience and so on, shaped to help manage those threats and those patterns, whether they might be patterns of thinking or of feeling or of behavior. Those patterns turn out to be maladaptive, and they're maladaptive because there potentially is a better way to handle the same situation. And so what therapy tries to do is the aim of psychotherapy is to trade outdated maladaptive patterns of response to potential threats, for healthier responses. And I'll just throw in that one of the typical responses that the inner mind comes up with is avoiding something that's going to remind us of a threat. In other words, anything that generates one of those dreaded proto-emotions might push the inner mind to come up with a way of avoiding that feeling. And that can be a response. Well, avoiding painful feelings, as we all know, is often maladaptive. It's often like denial, like some avoiding a medical test because you're afraid of the feeling that you'll have if it turns out to be positive. That's not very healthy. And so psychotherapy very often is encouraging people to face their feelings and to experience those feelings with a sense of safety and purpose rather than avoiding them. So anyway, entrenchment is the inner mind's tendency to hold on tightly to those old maladaptive responses as if they were necessary for survival. Well, yes, survival we is certainly a good thing, but these responses that get frozen in time are the ones that turn out to be problematic for us and are the targets of psychotherapy. Those are the things that we want to help our client trade in for healthier ones. And it turns out in the 20th century, that in 21st century, that finally we have an understanding of the mechanism of memory reconsolidation, which allows rewriting the schemas that hold those old patterns and rewriting them with new patterns. And that is on condition that we deliver this new disconfirming information into those subconscious, subcortical areas of the mind where change needs to take place. So part of accurate empathy is going to be about reaching the mind where it really counts, reaching the mind in the subconscious, subcortical areas where problem patterns originate. So that's a bit of a framework to put this all in perspective. Now, I'd like to talk about some of the ways that accurate empathy actually is helpful. First, I'm going to talk about what are called common factors. That is, things about the relationship where if you have a good relationship, it's been shown by lots of research to correlate with success in psychotherapy. Okay, that's great. That doesn't tackle the specifics of the problems people bring to us, but it does create a general atmosphere. I think of it as the relationship factors that set the table, and then the meal will turn out to be the changing of those old patterns for new ones. So first, I'm going to talk about these common relationship factors and how accurate empathy helps with those. Then I'm going to talk about how to achieve accurate empathy. What can we do to make this happen? And after that, I'll talk a little bit more about transformational change, those how we can trade in those specific patterns for healthier ones. So so the way I think about common factors is I think that what they boil down to is trust in the therapist and the process. That's pretty simple. it makes a lot of sense, and that's really what we're trying to do. So, what are the things that are going to encourage trust in the therapist and the process? Well, the it's accurate empathy because when we really understand the the uniqueness of an individual person, that automatically makes them feel like we care about them, like we're interested in them, and that engenders trust. And then as we gain empathy, we become just naturally tactful and careful about the way we listen. We don't talk too much. We don't talk when our client needs to do the sharing with us. We're open to listening. Um, we ask good questions. There's a difference between being a therapist and a social relationship. In a social relationship, you automatically respect and steer around the discomfort of the person. You don't get them to talk about things that are uncomfortable. If you do that, then you're intrusive because then the person wonders, well, why are you poking around at me and trying to find out things about me that are uncomfortable for me? And they'll shut you down. But as a therapist, we have a mandate, we have a purpose for a deeper understanding. And so it's not offensive to ask penetrating questions, to ask pretty important questions, but we need to ask them with tact and with an understanding that they may be uncomfortable. And so maybe we'll say, gee, this may be an uncomfortable question for you, and so I'm going to ask it because I think it's important, but you don't have to answer it, or maybe we can come back to it later if we need to. So you're going to be gentle and careful, and that comes automatically when you understand the fragility of the person that you're talking to, as well as the unique things about them that you want to understand better. So, um, uh, let me say something about, so one of the things that we do, one of the tools we have is the question. Well, a question is really an interesting thing. A question is opening up a field of interest. It's telling the person, I'm interested in this. And the most the scariest question we could ask is silence. Because silence with an expectation that the other person is going to talk is really uncomfortable because who knows what is going to blurt out, what I'm going to blurt out. Maybe I'm going to blurt out something that's really, really uncomfortable and is going to be compromising or going to have an effect on you that's going to make a big mess. And so silence is the most challenging question. And anything that we put into words is a narrowing down of the field of what we're asking. And so the art of asking questions is really about just how much we want to narrow down the field. If somebody is more concrete, we maybe want to narrow it more for them. If there's somebody who's used to thinking about things in varied ways, we might want to be more open-ended in order to encourage an authentic and genuine and significant kind of answer. I think of a question as being like a story without an ending. And we all know that the human mind is just is immediately seduced by a story. We always want a story and we want to know what happens in the end. And so a question is creating a story with an end that isn't known yet. And in doing that, in asking a question, we're we're then engaging our client in working together to find an answer to that question, to come to closure, to come to the end of the story, to find out what happens. That is terribly compelling. And one of the things I do sometimes is I'll say to somebody, I'm going to ask you a question. And it's an impossible question. I don't want you to answer it right away. But what I'll tell you is that in the next 5 minutes, the answer is going to be there right in front of us. We will probably won't recognize that that's the answer, but as we think about it, it'll turn out to be the answer. And it works. It works very, very typically. So, so a question also is a way to express, to share with our client what we don't know. And keeping track of what we don't know is extremely important. I'll give you an example of that. Let's say a person is expressing a good deal of anxiety, and it turns out they're anxious about some possible medical condition that maybe they've had some symptoms and they think, oh my gosh, I might have this. And we ask them, and it turns out, well, what are you afraid of? Well, I'm afraid of death. Well, what does death mean for that person? Death can mean many, many different things. Death could mean that I'm going to be separated from my loved ones, and I don't want to be separated. It could mean I'm going to lose control. It could mean I'm afraid there's going to be pain associated with it. Maybe it's the unknown, or it might be the effect it's going to have on other people. I'm not going to be there to support them. So you can see that for any individual, the meaning of death, even the immediate meaning, is going to be extremely individual. And the only way to find that out is to ask. So we need to be asking ourselves all the time, what is it that I don't know yet? So the the way I think of it is, in a way, what we don't want is we don't want labels. Fear of death is a label. That's kind of a generality, and it doesn't tell us anything about the uniqueness of this person. What does death mean? Why is it threatening? Why is it scary? And the answer to that doesn't have just one layer. It probably has more than one layer, so that even if we get an answer, we need to be open. That's what accurate empathy means. It means being open to the possibility that there are other layers and more meanings to something that we already know something about. That things in life have many different meanings. Um, so so seeking accurate empathy means being open, allowing our own sensitivity to inform our tact and our thoughtfulness and carefulness about the way we inquire about things and the way we show ourselves to be interested. And it means keeping track of what we don't know, keeping track especially of the things that we might have asked in the past that were too much at the time, because if we let them go and leave them out, um, leaving things out of the frame of possibilities is not a good idea, because it's an indication that we're not really, really interested. So we need to keep track of things that we've put aside that to ask about or to learn about later. So this way we have a constantly growing, and sometimes, it takes a long time to get to know another human being, even to a moderate degree. And it often takes years, especially when we're dealing with areas that have been covered up, that have been secret, that have been guarded. It can take years to come to the real depth of what it is that we're seeking. So now let's turn to how this in-depth understanding of another human being, this in-depth attunement to another human being, is going to be helpful for transformational change. What is transformational change? It's the kind of changes to those unhealthy patterns, those outdated, survival-oriented patterns that are frozen in time and coming out of the subcortical, subconscious inner mind, trading those for healthier ones. And so what we need to do, there are two requirements for memory reconsolidation, which is the mechanism by which the schemas that hold those old ways of processing a potential threat, of recognizing and processing a threat, those are held in schemas. Schemas are logical, they're call them nodes of logic, where for those of you who are interested in the science of this, this is where predictive coding comes in, that allows us to match up, to do pattern matching with the things that are happening in the here and now that are coming in through the senses, with past experience and past meanings that have been given to those combinations of inputs. And also the same kind of predictive coding and schemas produces a kind of pattern matching to match a potential response with the identity, with the details of a something that's experienced as a threat, so that you remember those proto emotions trigger the seeking of a response and another node of logic in a way that pattern matches to come up with the proper response for that set of circumstances. And what we want to do is we want to substitute a better response for the old one that the schema is matching up with the circumstances. Okay, so so how is accurate empathy going to help with that process? Memory reconsolidation has two major requirements. The first one is that the old pattern needs to be in an active state. And that's a neurologically active state. It means that that proto-emotion that I was talking about has been triggered. And we'll talk about that more in just a moment. The second requirement is disconfirming information, but the essence of that is really not so much the information. We can always figure out how the inner mind gets things wrong. Like, for example, it's seeking to avoid an experience instead of facing an emotion and learning that it's not the end of the world and it's going to be okay. Um, the the um, so what's important about this disconfirming information is that it has to be delivered. It has to be delivered to the same subconscious, subcortical areas where the schemas exist, where that logic is applied, and where the decision is made that there is a threat in the first place, and the decision of what to do about it. So those two pieces of logic are the things that we need to change. So how are we going to do it? We're going to do it with memory reconsolidation, because memory reconsolidation is permanent. Once it takes place, then the schemas are rewritten. It may take place in increments or in facets, because a threat can have many facets, many areas, many aspects to it. And so it's not always an all or nothing process, but it is a process of rewriting schemas. And so how does accurate empathy help us to activate the old schemas, and how does accurate empathy help us to provide, to deliver disconfirming information, to rewrite those schemas? Those are the two things that need to happen at about the same time. Well, so let's talk about activating the old schemas first. And that happens when the inner mind begins to experience something like the threatening circumstances. How do you do that? Well, exposure therapy is aimed at doing exactly that. It's a set of techniques for doing that. There are lots of other ways to do it, but let's take that one where you play battle sounds for a veteran who's been in the war, and those sensations reawaken all of the feelings of dread that go with being on a battlefield. And so it makes it real. Makes it real means what? Well, it means that we've gone in, we've activated the inner mind, and part of the response that comes back is emotion, is an affect. So when we see tears, or we see a change in breathing, or fidgeting in the chair, we're seeing automatic response patterns that are coming from, that are generated by that inner mind, by those schemas. And and those are an indication to us, those are our best clinical indication that we've hit pay dirt, that we've activated a place in the person's mind that is outside of consciousness, and that is intimately associated with the threat that's been producing, that's been triggering the response that we want to change. And maybe the response is terror, or avoidance, um, or rage. It could be anything, but that's what we want to do. We want to activate the old the old pattern. And the way we know we've done that is mainly affect. Sometimes the information that comes back might be telling you that yes, we've activated something, but usually, as clinically, it's it's affect. It's the physical manifestations of emotion that tell us this is genuine. It's not just intellectual. It's really gotten down to the inner mind, where the action is really taking place. So so that's extremely important. Let's talk for just a moment about how different therapies do that. Well, psychodynamic therapy does it by exploration, by poking around with the intimate inner mind, using the metaphors that consciousness uses to translate the nonverbal things that are going on deep down in the subconscious mind. And so that's one way to activate things, is by poking around. Another really good one is transference. If you have a relationship with a person over time, then they're going to start to experience relational tendencies or relational patterns that come from long ago. You're going to re-trigger those things. So your patient tells you, "Oh, if I tell you this, I know you're going to throw me out of therapy." Well, you know, they know that you're not going to throw them out of therapy, or they wouldn't say it. But there's a part of them deep down that's been activated with a response that says, uh-oh, better be braced, because the therapist, I'm going to be thrown out of therapy in a moment if I tell this. But I'm still tempted to tell it, because the inner mind does, when you show an interest, it does want to be heard. It wants to be listened to. It wants to express what's concerning it. So that's how, and then there are experiential therapies that use two-chair exercises, for example, to recreate old circumstances that are going to trigger the inner mind to and trigger those schemas to identifying a potential threat and moving on to a possible response for that. Okay, let's move then to how do we deliver disconfirming information? Well, the first thing I want to share with you is that we need to have some disconfirming information to deliver. And very often, that disconfirming information is in the form of experiences. In other words, by doing something, if you stand up tall, or if you wear some great big boots, then you're going to feel like a different person. That's an experience. And that kind of experience communicates very directly with the inner subconscious subcortical mind. Uh, so, um, so we need to have um, sometimes information like the fact that no, if you excel, you're not going to be punished. That might be a piece of information, but sometimes it's experience, and experience has a special weight because it's nonverbal and it goes directly to the inner mind, where awareness is most pungent. I think so. Let's think about that a little bit. This is a place where I have an argument with psychodynamic therapy that says don't tell people what to do, and that the client needs to figure out for themselves, kind of on their own, how their behavior might change, and then you hope that they're going to find a healthier pattern of behavior along the process. Well, I think we can be helpful about that without causing trouble, without causing side effects in the relationship, if we're careful about it. But I think that CBT and DBT have a lot to teach us about how to identify and nurture and support people's learning skills that they didn't have before, and that they maybe didn't even have the enough knowledge to imagine that such a thing existed. And so teaching skills, or helping people acquire new skills and new ways of approaching things, even new ways of thinking about things, is an important part of doing therapy. And yes, there are potential dangers. That's another conversation, and we need to be aware of those things. But for the most part, just a blanket prohibition against telling people, against talking about behavior change, is not a good idea because that's essential in helping people acquire new information, new disconfirming information to substitute for the old maladaptive patterns that are really the focus of psychotherapy. So, so there are many ways, and what I find myself doing these days is really consciously talking to my clients about the old understanding, the old meanings that are causing trouble, and how do we undo those meanings? I had an example not long ago where um, a a person had kind of been working on and learned that problem solving when you're dealing with problems that you can't solve doesn't really help anything. It's not a good idea. And this was somebody who's a consummate problem solver. And so we were thinking about how do we help her inner mind, who's frozen in time as a child, how do we help her inner mind to realize that you don't have to anticipate every possible calamity that might take place, like that the airliner might crash or something like that. That spending a lot of energy trying to predict things that are unpredictable is just not going to work. So, what is the alternative? What is a better understanding? Well, if you try to say, no, you can't really predict what's going to go wrong, and so it's not worth trying, try to tell that to a child and have them understand. They're not going to understand. What a child needs instead is some grown-up person who says, listen, trust me, it's going to be okay, that whatever happens, I know how to deal with it, and we will problem solve at that point, and we'll problem solve effectively because you know that we're good problem solvers in the first place. So that's what we're going to do. Um, the presence of a good problem solver who says I'm going to handle it, that's the information that the inner mind needed to hear. And so we focused on that together as this absorbing this information that yes, you are a consummate problem solver, and for your inner mind, that problem solver is going to be there ready to do the job, but it isn't necessary since you have a problem solver. It isn't going to be necessary to anticipate everything that could possibly go wrong. And so that's a tremendous relief for the inner self who's been focused on trying by any means possible to avoid another calamity. Um, and that's a tremendous reassurance. So that's an example of disconfirming information that we worked out together. We figured out what would be the disconfirming information that would reassure a frozen in time inner child who is oriented towards survival and trying to deal with situations that were unsolvable. So that's how we fulfill the conditions for memory reconsolidation, and that's how we're going to do the specific part of psychotherapy, which is helping to trade maladaptive, entrenched maladaptive patterns for healthier ones. Now, what I didn't really tell you earlier when I talked about common factors, I'm realizing that what I didn't say is that entrenchment means resistance to change. It means the inner mind sees change as dangerous because it means I'm going to lose this self-protective mechanism, the self-protective pattern that my life depends on. And so we're trying to help an inner child in a way, frozen in time, to appreciate that the old pattern, that it's okay to try something different. It's okay to let go of the old pattern. And there is a lot of fear and trepidation that goes with that. How do we overcome that fear and trepidation? Well, we overcome it with a good relationship, with trust in the therapist and the process. That is, those same common factors that have been shown to enhance any therapy, having a good relationship, the use of it, the main benefit of having a good relationship is that it encourages the client to be willing and ready to try things that are new, that are scary, and to go into uncomfortable territory. That's what they do. And once we have a willingness to enter into that uncomfortable territory, then we can begin to use accurate empathy to fulfill the conditions necessary for memory reconsolidation to permit the trading of an old, frozen, maladaptive, outdated pattern for a fresh and healthier new one. So those are the two ways, both by enhancing the relationship and by fulfilling the conditions for memory reconsolidation, that accurate empathy, which is an ongoing process of allowing our client, of encouraging our client to share their deep, intimate, unique, and personal self with us, um, fulfills the conditions for change in both of those ways, overcoming the entrenchment and allowing the trading of an old, frozen, unhealthy pattern for a better one. So, so in that way, then, if you tell yourself that what I'm up to here is trying to achieve accurate empathy, then you've covered almost all of the bases in your therapy. As I've thought about it, there's only one other thing that you should be concerned about besides achieving accurate empathy, and that is making sure that your client is aware of and is learning the new skills and behavior patterns and thinking patterns that they're going to need ultimately to give their inner mind an alternative to the old pattern. So, so the learning part of psychotherapy is equally important, um, um, along with accurate empathy. And just to emphasize that point, I'll say something that I've said before sometimes. About probably 50% of the work that I do in psychotherapy has to do with arrested development. Because when development gets stuck, as it does when there's a major threat in a certain area maybe of a person's life, then fortunately, development can be picked up anytime, and development depends on having new experiences and growing with them. So a lot of the treatment in psychotherapy is overcoming arrested development or restarting arrested development, consisting of gaining new experience, going through the awkwardness and the scariness of something new, and learning from it. And so all of this learning is a big part of psychotherapy, in addition to accurate empathy. So if I had to say, what are the two things that you need to pay attention to as a therapist? I'd say number one is accurate empathy, and number two is making sure that the person is learning and growing in areas that are going to help them have a broader repertoire of healthy responses to life. And so that's it. And I hope this is enjoyable to you. I'd love you to subscribe to my Substack. It's howtherapyworks.substack.com, and my website, which has many essays on psychotherapy. And the URL for that is howtherapyworks.com, www.howtherapyworks.com. And I also have a YouTube channel where this lecture or this talk is going to reside. So I hope I see more of you soon, and thank you for listening. Bye for now.